now I've got two questions. So the title of the paper was Why the Ukraine Crisis is the West's Fault. Do you agree with that premise?
All right, folks, I just watched a jaw-dropping exchange in a Senate hearing, and we need to talk about it. It featured Senator Mark Kelly grilling a Trump-era nominee, Mr. Lomire, for the Undersecretary of the Air Force. And let me tell you, as someone who loves this country and believes in standing with our Democratic allies, this was deeply concerning. Let's watch the video.
Senator King is next, and he has graciously yielded to Senator Kelly. So, Senator Kelly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator King. Mr. Lomire, you recently made a post that seemed to indicate Russia was justified in its invasion of Ukraine because Russia feared NATO expansion. This isn't just untrue, it's also the exact kind of misinformation that Russia pushed to justify them rolling troops and tanks across the border into Ukraine and bombing Ukrainian cities. So, Mr. Lomire, I want to be very direct here. In your opinion, was Russia justified in its invasion of Ukraine?
Thanks, Senator Kelly, for taking the time to meet with me a week and a half ago. In answer to your question, I'll say as directly back as I can as well, and in respect, I don't believe I used the word justified in my post. However, I am a bit of a historian. I like context, and what I've always said publicly is that all heads of state have to make determinations for their own security. And so when I say something like that, whether it's with Vladimir Putin or any head of state, I'm saying that they are entitled to make those decisions whether we agree with them or not. Now, it's a bit outside of the lane of the Undersecretary of the Air Force, of course, whose role as a Chief Management Officer will be to organize, train, and equip forces for the fight for any given administration to meet combatant commander needs.
Well, I'll give you that the post did not say that, but you did post a article by John Mearsheimer that said why the Ukraine crisis is the West's fault. You did not say that was your opinion. So I'm going to ask you the question again. In your opinion, was Russia justified in its invasion of Ukraine?
For context, which always, of course, Senator, as you're aware, matters a great deal, that was an article that was written by John Mearsheimer, an international relations scholar, in 2014, and it was a comment about Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and some of the history leading up to that. It was not an article that had any bearing upon what happened in the decade that followed per se, but it was an international relations academic piece that talked about the annexation of Crimea. And his opinion in that article, and this is a very insightful article, in fact, traces through the history of NATO expansion since it was created. It's, again, an academic piece. It's something that we study at strategy.
Crimea was part of Ukraine. In my view, still is part of Ukraine.
Yes, Senator, and the point I just make in bringing that up is that the opinion that was shared in that post about that article had to do with past conflict and implications for the ways in which allies interact on the world stage and how that influences the decisions that heads of state make. It was not in any way intended to excuse the behavior of any head of state, including President Putin.
So now I've got two questions. So the title of the paper was Why the Ukraine Crisis is the West's Fault. Do you agree with that premise?
It's an enticing title. Again, it was pertaining to decisions that were being made a decade prior to the conflict that you're asking about. It's an incredibly informative academic work that is based in international relations theory. I very much like the paper and would still recommend to people today, if they're interested in understanding the conflict in the region, it's a rich resource of information.
Do you agree that the Ukraine crisis is the West's fault?
No, because that's far too simplistic. Again, global politics is messy and complicated affairs. What I will say is that it's very clear. A couple of years ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine's been on the defensive trying to fight that war, and of course has had bipartisan support in this Congress.
So was Russia justified in invading Ukraine?
Senator, with respect, I've not said that.
Well, that's why I'm asking you the
I
question.
know you are, and I really, the reason I'm hesitating shouldn't be taken or interpreted to imply an answer one way or the other. I like context. I don't like yes and no's, and I don't like soundbite media. I'll say that I believe that heads of state retain the right to make decisions on who they'll go to war with. That's not something I decide. That's not something even the United States or its leaders get to decide, even as much as we want to weigh in on those positions. I can say, though, for certainty
So
that
it sounds
I'm
like you
grateful
think
to see.
it's okay for one of our adversaries to invade one of our allies.
I did not say that. What I will say is that I'm grateful that there are currently efforts underway by this administration to try and seek a peaceful resolution of that conflict. I think it's time that it end.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So here's what went down. Mr. Lomire posted an article titled, "Why the Ukraine Crisis is the West's Fault." Now, he claims it was purely academic. But when Senator Kelly, a former astronaut and Navy combat pilot who served this country with distinction, asked him point blank if he thought Russia was justified in invading Ukraine, Lomire danced around it like his job depended on ambiguity. Let's be clear, there is nothing academic about tanks rolling into Kyiv. There is nothing theoretical about war crimes, murdered civilians, and a sovereign nation fighting for its survival. Russia invaded Ukraine. Full stop. And anyone who can't say that clearly and unequivocally does not belong in a position of leadership in the U.S. military. Lomire says he's a fan of context. Sure, context matters, but not when it's being used to rationalize or soften the reality of brutal aggression. Trying to tiptoe around a direct question about whether Russia was justified is cowardly. It sends the message that we might be okay with authoritarianism when it suits someone's so-called historical analysis. And here's the kicker. This guy is supposed to help lead the U.S. Air Force. The same Air Force that stands ready to defend freedom, protect NATO allies, and push back on global threats. If he can't call out a dictator when he sees one, how the hell is he going to defend democratic values? As a progressive, I believe in peace. But I also believe in justice. And when an autocratic regime invades a democratic neighbor, we don't sit on the sidelines. We don't make excuses. We support the people fighting for freedom, and we hold the line against tyranny. Mark Kelly did what every patriot should do. He stood up and demanded clarity. And Mr. Lomire failed the test. This is about more than one hearing. This is about whether we let people in power warp the truth and excuse aggression, or whether we hold the line and defend democracy at home and abroad. Because being patriotic doesn't mean blind loyalty. It means standing for what's right, even when it's hard. And if you ask me, that's the American way.